Stay tuned, stay tuned, stay tuned. I'm here with the coach, John Brent.
And I'm here with the vet in Griffin.
How you doing today, Coach?
Man, I'm doing wonderful.
Hey, today we're going to talk about something a little somber a little bit. We're going to talk about 9/11.
Yeah, 9/11, that's a day to remember in our country for sure.
Yes, it is, and changed all our lives. And can you believe it's been 19 years ago?
No, it seems like yesterday for me that experience happened that just pretty much changed the world.
It did. So, Coach, where were you at during 9/11? When 9/11 happened?
And when 9/11 happened, I lived in Leesburg, Texas. Actually had an office in Mount Pleasant, Texas, and I just made it to work. Got news that there was something going on with an airplane that had hit one of the buildings in New York. And supposedly, at the time, I was told that it was just a prop plane that accidentally just hit the tower. So I called my dad, was talking to him about it. I pulled it up on the internet, was watching it. And as I was talking to my dad, I was watching at the same time, I saw a second plane come flying in.
Oh, my goodness.
So when I saw that, I knew that we were under attack. And but as a civilian, one of the first things that happened to me was I had to make a decision. I had a young kid. To keep the business open. It was a kind of fear that I've never had at that time. I'd never, I was a young person, never been around wartime, but I knew we were under attack and that pretty much we're at war with somebody. Right. I remember a couple of things that come to mind is I remember deciding to go home and close the business for the day and watch the news. It was just this channel, that channel, just over and over and over. And then my dad called me that afternoon. He says, whatever you have to do, get as many gas cans as you can and go down and fill up your vehicles and buy some extra gas because they're saying on the news that we could have a gas shortage. And I'm thinking, in Leesburg, Texas, are you kidding me? So there's only one store if you've ever been to Leesburg, Texas, and I go down there and there's a line on both sides of it about 6 cars deep.
Oh my goodness.
And that's when the reality hit that, wow, this didn't just happen in New York City, where, almost 3,000 people we found out later died immediately. This was already going across the country, and the fear had set in. And I remember I was scheduled to go to Dallas the next day or two for business, and I was scared to go into the large city because we hear all these reports of possible Sears building was going to be attacked. L.A. had some kind of issues, planes that couldn't be found at the time, something that our country had not gone through in my lifetime. So, not only was it a day of fear, it was a time of unknown that just came out of it. When is the next attack? It was almost like you were waiting for something else to happen.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, and as a civilian, that's just kind of the way it was. It was just a shock that we could be hit in the mouth like that, and didn't know the details at that time, but I really thought it almost was like another country in my mind was attacking us.
Wow. So I will say for me, I was across the pond, actually. I was in a place called Germany. I had moved there in July of 2001, and my wife had to go to a military school, and we're doing military, and then she had to go to the military school, so she was there during the attack. And I just remember I was holding this job called maintenance control supervisor, and what that is you manage a bunch of shops that does production for the division. It's kind of in layman's terms is what it is. And it's really a cool job. And I had 17 shops and we supported the whole division. And when 9/11 happened, of course, we're 6 hours ahead in Germany. So it's in the afternoon, mid-afternoon when this happened. A lieutenant came down from upstairs who worked in the support operations for the battalion there. And we knew him, and he was kind of a goofy guy. And he comes down and he says, guys, you won't believe this. Someone just flew an airplane in the World Trade Center. And I looked over at my shop officer, who's also a lieutenant, and we're kind of like, yeah, he's kind of out there, whatever, man. And he went back upstairs, and then like 30 minutes later, he came back downstairs and he said, somebody flew another airplane into another building. And then we looked at each other and goes, this is serious. And I picked up the phone and called my first sergeant up. And I said, hey, Top, did you hear the news? He said, yes. He said, you're not to release anybody. I got to go to battalion. We have a meeting. Make sure we have 100% accountability. You need to work that now.
Wow.
So we went through and did that. And then about 15 minutes later, I tried to call him back, and he called me back, and he says, we got to get accountability of every single soldier in the unit. The unit was about 150 strong, to include the ones on leave. And to understand the military, when people go on leave, they go on real leave. People go home to Philippines and things like that, and we had to get in contact with them. We were not to be released till we had 100% contact.
Wow.
And I said, so what do we do about child care centers? Because this was already approaching 5 o'clock in the afternoon and such. He said, the child care centers are locked down. People can't get their kids.
Wow.
He said, we have to actually put guards at the child care center. And that was one of the big things, is we had to guard everything. And he goes, this is what I got. You have 150 people in the company. You're the MCS, the Maintenance Control Supervisor. You're allowed to have 25 for mission, and the rest have to be for guard force.
Wow.
He says, and the 25 include the commander and myself, so pick them wisely. And I looked at him and I said, well, are the warrant officers going to work? Because if not, they're going on the guard force. And he goes, that's your choice. I said, well, they're going on the guard force then. I said, who does work? I need them to actually turn real wrenches. And I remember that night going into the DFAC, because we couldn't leave. It was up on the TV screen, but while it was up on the TV screen was one of the few times I've ever been in a dining facility in the military community, besides in basic, that you could hear a pin drop in. Because they're normally rowdy, people are talking there, and everybody was glued to the TV.
What was the mood?
It was very somber. Everybody was just kind of just paused, because we didn't know really what was going on. We couldn't understand it, comprehend it.
Right.
And so the mood for the soldiers it's the quietest I've ever seen a dining facility. That's probably the best way to explain it, because we were just kind of, what do we do next?
Yeah.
And that was everybody's big question. When are we going to go kick somebody's butt, and what do we do next?
Right.
And so, Coach, what I'd like to ask you is, how did it affect your life after that? Yes.
Well, one of the things immediately was a lot of things that you didn't think about before being, a concern became a big concern. Just as driving into a large city, low-flying airplanes, then just going on the next flight. The security that you had to go through was something that was beforehand. It was, you can go to the airport and you're in the airplane 10, 15 minutes, and it became hour and a half. Yeah. Also, one of the things that I do miss about the time, and I'm not making a lot of the situation, is the division that we have in our country now between the two major parties subsided for a time. And for a few weeks, maybe even a few months, everyone not only was behind President Bush, but was behind the troops. I remember everybody being on I think it was the Capitol steps, singing together. It was a kumbaya moment that our country really needs now.
Yeah, I agree. I remember that time as all the congressional leaders, except for one, I won't name Barbara Boxer's name. Right. But except for one, because she had to prove a point that in the time our nation's need to use force, she wanted to make sure that President Bush was held in check. Sure. I guess that's what they voted in for. But anyway, you're right. We had a kumbaya moment. Everybody else was lockstep. Let's defend the country, and we'll worry about our political bickering later. Absolutely. I think that was paramount.
And, I do want to ask you this, not only as a vet, but also just as a person that studies politics like myself. If that were to happen today, would there be the unity?
Man, I don't know. I question that myself, and I'll throw a comment in there about one of our senior leaders said about 2 years prior to the President Trump-Hillary Clinton election, that about 2 years prior to that, that our biggest enemy was actually our inability to get along congressionally.
Right.
And I don't think it's ever faded away, to be honest. I think it's been there. We just kind of sugarcoated them and diverted our attention somewhere else. But I do agree with that totally. I will say, from my perspective, I was trying to move my family to Germany, and so you have on-post housing, which, you got. But I didn't have on-post housing. I lived off-post. And I just signed for my house that I was going to live in about 5 days prior. And my concern was they going to lock me out of that because were they going to make all the troops come on post to stay, which they did not? And was this going to hold my family off from coming there with me? That was a major concern of mine, for immediate concern. So
yeah. And as civilians, I think sometimes we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes with the military. But I could imagine at that time the planning and major things that were going on that was, to protect us, but also from an individual standpoint, families, what are you going to do with your family? What are you going to go to war in Iraq, Afghanistan, wherever? And that's not something that civilians, we really have to deal with. To us, that's a nightly news, not a daily, decision we have to make.
Well, I'll say for us, from the immediate side, within 8 months, I became a first sergeant. And my commander and I, we immediately planned. We did not know we were going anywhere. And a month later, we found out we were going to Iraq. We immediately planned for the worst case scenario. And we started ordering things we needed for our vehicles. And, we started making sure we had all the right equipment. And we did it subliminally. We didn't want the troops to get all riled up. But we started staggering training for the worst case scenario. And we kind of laid the groundwork for that. For me personally, though, it cost me 2 trips to Iraq and 1 to Afghanistan. And my wife, she did the 15-monther to Iraq.
Man.
As well. And so a lot of time away from the family, a lot of time worrying about not your family and worrying about everything downrange, to be honest. So.
Well, I do know this, that the teaching this in school to the first kids that I taught this to were 8th graders about 5 years ago. And they were like, some of them were born then, some were born right after. And the high schoolers that I've talked to just last year, it's like they don't have a memory of it. And watching their faces when they see those planes hit is pretty amazing. I will have to say that last year one of the guys stood up and shouted, "Hell yeah," when President Bush was standing on the pile with the bullhorn. And this guy had never seen that. And he just screamed out, "Hell yeah." And he pumped his fist in the air. And I thought, that's how we all felt at that time.
Yeah.
I kind of felt at that moment, there's 2 moments I think of President Bush in that. Number one, he's at the table in the White House, and he chokes up. And I first thought, well, we all have done that. We've all choked up over this. Yeah. And then when he was on that hill and he yelled out, "The people are going to knock down these buildings, are going to hear from us soon," I felt American again, like we were in control.
So I said this in another podcast, but I think it's worth saying again. My uncle, who lived right in this area here, was a forever Democrat. And I told him once, I said, I might run for a state office, like be a state representative. And his wife said, "As long as you become a Democrat, we'll vote for you. If not, we're not voting for you." I'm like, "Really? I'm not good enough? What? Are you kidding me?"
Right.
And so he was hardline Democrat. But I remember him telling me when I came back from Iraq, he said, "Ian," he said, "I am so grateful that we had President Bush because I knew we were at least going to do something and not sit on our butts."
Right.
And it made you proud to be an American. I mean, when you watch President Bush up there with the bullhorn. And I will say just the stories that we would hear downrange about President Bush meeting with soldiers that were wounded and even meeting with soldiers that had died, their family members, and the family member cussed them out. And he took it on the chin and he just said, "Yes, ma'am, you have every right to be mad at me." I got nothing but respect for that guy.
Yeah, and not to say anything about President 44 or 45. I'll let them, have their own legacy. But I think President Bush, to me, was the last president that you consider to be presidential. Yeah. And because, you have a lot of emotions with the other two that sometimes come into play in division. But, and I don't think we should ever lose sight of the 2,977 people that died that day. I know it's been 19 years. Some of those people that had babies at that time are now graduated high school, have their own family. I mean, that's how far, or how long it's been, and it's crazy.
Well, and 9/11 caused, that was the immediate repercussions of it, with 25,000 injuries off of it. But over 500,000 people died in the Middle East because of this.
Yeah.
You know, because war is not forgiving whatsoever, and over 500,000 people died in the Middle East over this, and then we lost close to 7,000 soldiers between Afghanistan and Iraq. Those numbers up to 2018.
And I know, I know we mentioned the Pentagon. I mean, we mentioned the World Trade Centers, but we also can't forget the Pentagon and also Flight 93 that was, down in Pennsylvania. People can remember, or they should, Todd Beamer's story. But the Pentagon, when the Pentagon was hit, that was an absolute. To me, it was very unsettling. The World Trade Center, was one after the other, but then boom, we're over here. The White House is possibly under attack. You're hearing all these things. That was when I thought, man, we're really at war.
So I have two things. One with the Pentagon is my last boss. He was in the Pentagon when it happened, and he said my biggest concern was the general he worked for was finding him, and him and the general had just stepped out of that section where it got hit.
Wow. And
so that's kind of brings home to what happened there. And then when I was in Afghanistan, my battalion was in charge of some National Guard units, and one of them was New York National Guard. And in the New York National Guard, several of those members of they call it the Orion Division, I believe is what it's called. There's a patch that's like Orion. And several of those there were in the World Trade Center during the time it happened. They were there or right around it. There's one young lady that has a scar down her back where a beam hit her on her back.
Unbelievable.
And the pride that those individuals had of being, because they talk about that they responded without being called in.
Well, that's one of the things in Texas. We always have this big Texas pride. Everything's bigger in Texas. The Longhorns, the Aggies. It's this thing, but there's a lot of Texans have pride. But boy, that was some kind of amazing pride that we saw from New York. And not only was it New York, everyone in Texas that I remember at that time were wearing NYPD shirts and hats. I mean, it was an amazing time, and I really, really, truly hope that our country can get back to some kind of civility like that again without some type of major incident. And whatever we can do as citizens and as a coach and a vet, we want to make sure that we're always trying to push it forward to have a better country. And, so make sure you do comment below. Tell us how we can, maybe some topics that we should talk about that are more positive like this one.
Yes.
Even though it was a bad and sad day, we want more positive things to come than just politics.
And speaking of this here, as we just released this today here on 9/11 itself, we will be out at Los Pinos in Pittsburgh, Texas, out at the winery. We'll be drinking wine out there.
Huh?
And we'll be having a podcast out there between 6 and 8, so stop on by.
Yep.
And tell us where were you on 9/11. If you can't tell us on the podcast that we just released today, come out here and tell us in a couple of days.
I think it'd be great if some people maybe would just write down where they were, if they want to put it on a couple sentences and put it on the table while the podcast is going on, and let us know, and we'll look at it. And if we have a question or two, maybe we could bring them up and talk to them.
Yes, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
I think we'll have fun with it.
Absolutely.
And I think it'll bring, not so great memories, but also great memories of the country uniting together as well.
Absolutely.
Tragedy.
Yes, sir.
Well, Coach, I think this was a pretty good one.
Yes, sir. And I appreciate this. I appreciate your service.
Well, thank you. Thank you for letting us do this.
Absolutely.
So, from the coach
to the vet.
Stay tuned, stay tuned, stay tuned.